Hey everyone, I'm Rather Incoherent. Festival of Legends is about to drop, and I figured I'd post my own tier list of how I perceive the legendaries in this set. I will be going from weakest to strongest with basically dust this, it's unusable tier, to tech cards and weaker cards, to cards that fit into a deck and you would be happy to run them, but they're probably not the reason you're running them. The A tier cards are probably the reason that compels you to run a deck of that archetype, and S tier cards are cards that I legitimately believe might see nerfs and that I'm very worried about the power level of. There shouldn't ideally be any cards in the S or F tiers, but that will not be the case today. Within the tiers, these cards are so different from one another that I'm not going to try to rank them. Everything in F tier just is in F tier. Being left or right doesn't mean anything. This is so apples to oranges and so theoretical that I can't meaningfully place them with that minute degree of detail. So let's get into it. What's in F tier? Well, Black Rock and Roll, the warrior legendary spell, is going right in there. Give all minions in your deck attack and health equal to their cost for 5 mana. And I think what kills me about this is it encourages you to make silly combos, but if you draw the pieces, it doesn't work. The least it could do is draw a minion afterwards, or affect the minions in your hand, or not cost 5 mana to do nothing that turn. There are so many ways this could be better, and ultimately the effect it has, is this really going to be meaningfully better than Lortham Artheron in most cases? No. And that's a neutral legendary that doesn't see play. Why is this a thing? Why is the weakest class presently getting cards like this? Next up, unfortunately, we have another warrior legendary. It's Rockmaster Voon. Apparently, there's an old card from an expansion that I didn't play during, Warmaster Voon, that is the exact same card, except it copies all the dragons in your hand, which is an objectively better effect, by the way, because you can't control which minion types end up in your hand. There's a bunch of minion types in your deck, and you might draw the same one over and over again. Whereas if your whole deck is dragons, then they all work for the old Voon. The old Voon was better than this one. Also, it didn't see play and the game was weaker then. So why on earth is this still the same? This could be a 3-mana card with Rush and it still wouldn't look particularly strong. That's an insane amount of buffs to not matter. That's clear F tier status. And I hate to say it, I don't mean to drive a nail in the coffin, I don't mean to beat a dead horse. But this is actually just warrior tier because I don't have any other card that I think is truly unplayable in its current state. Cards that I think are weak, cards that I think might not see much play, but not cards that I view as actually being downright bad like these. So I'm going to start with my C tier with easily the most controversial thing I'm going to say on this tier list. It's Kangor Dancing King. I think any hype for this card is just way too in a vacuum to be realistic. Kangor is a 5-mana do-nothing with a silenceable effect, and for his effect to be good, you have to build your deck around it. If you're just swapping him with random 4-drops, he's not actually doing all that much. You need to be playing a big, expensive control deck using low-cost spells and high-cost minions to make Kangor good. And there is tutoring for Kangor. You can build that deck in such a way that Lead Dancer will pull Kangor guaranteed, and you can include more draw. You can build the Kangor deck, that's not a problem. The issue is that if the Kangor deck ever becomes meta, then with ETC and tradable silence minions, they're just going to run silence and Kangor will not be viable anymore. So if Kangor is in meta because he's good, he gets stomped out of the meta by silence, and if he's out of meta, then he can briefly have a resurgence before people notice and start running silence again. Which means that sometimes Kangor is an F tier card. That comes right after he's really good and he's like an A tier card, presuming that deck is actually functional. But I don't know that it will be. Because Kangor requires you to build around him and is silenceable, and there are so many ways to put silence in your deck at relatively low cost in the current game, I think Kangor is physically incapable of being a tier 1 deck. And if it turns out you can just run him and he's fine, and I'm overhyping how much you need to build around him, then alright, cool, he's probably deserving to be a little bit higher than that. I don't think I would put him in my deck if he was just a strong value play though. I think I would want more than that out of him, and otherwise I would put something more in line with my current deck plan. So in a control deck, you might just run Kangor because you can, but that would preclude you from running any battle cries that you really care about, because he might break them. Which is why ultimately I put Kangor in my C tier. I think his vulnerability to silence and the way he interacts negatively with battle cry effects ultimately means that when you use Kangor, you build around him, and that deck can be countered with the silence tools available to us. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and throw in both mage legendaries. I think neither of these have a home. DJ Manastorm showed up just in time for there to be a mage set with literally no big spells to reduce to 0. And this is a tier list for the current version of the game. I'm not going to be talking about like how these cards might theoretically do in the future. Right now, going into Festival of Legends, DJ Manastorm does not have a meaningful target for his ability, so I'm sure you can put him in a deck and he'll have some minor positive impact, but honestly, I was hesitant not to include him down here. I'm mostly putting him in C tier for the Warrior tier meme. He's not much better than those cards. He's 10 mana, play a spell immediately, but the spells he's making cheap just aren't what they used to be, and it's not going to get very much done. With Infinitize the Maxitude, this is obviously great in a Value Mage. The question is just, does Value Mage exist? To which I would respond very heartily with no. There are no big spells for Mage, and that is indicative of the fact that it's not really a top end for Mage right now. I don't know what control late game you're trying to do when you make a Mage deck. So to me, Infinitize the Maxitude simply doesn't connect with the current card base. This could easily be an A tier card in future expansions and different metas with more cards to support it, but as the game is now, Infinitize the Maxitude just isn't very good. Next up, I'm going to throw in Tony, King of Piracy. This is a tech card. Basically, any deck can run the Jailer and this, and if they do that, they're able to make their minions immune, swap decks, the opponent has fatigue, they get no cards, you win, unless they have hard removal that's indiscriminate, like Twisting Nether or Soul, what's it called, Soul Stealer, the Blood Knight 8 mana, Twisting Nether on a stick. But if you're gonna do something like that, I feel like the best deck to do it in is Warlock, and Warlock already has Mal'Ganis, which gets the same thing done more or less, and I don't think this is really the way to run a backup effect there. I think if you are going to run a backup effect to make sure your Mal'Ganis is sticking and that you're getting valuable things, what you really want to do isn't Tony, King of Piracy, it's Photographer Fizzle. If you're going to run a backup deck and a Jailer Mal'Ganis lock Warlock, you probably just want to take a picture of that Mal'Ganis in your hand and shuffle it into your deck after you play the Jailer, right? That way, even if Mal'Ganis does get hard removed, your opponent can't fix it. Additionally, this is also an infinite combo, because if you have a Zola in your hand, you can play Photographer Fizzle, picture the Zola and the Mal'Ganis, then play the Zola to get Fizzle back, and you can just keep doing this until your opponent can't remove it. If you're using a backup win condition in your Mal'Ganis Jailer lock, it should just be Photographer Fizzle. You don't need Tony to make sure you're eventually locking your opponent out with that deck. And Photographer Fizzle goes in this bracket because, like, really, what's this for? It's for a super late game value deck that enters into super late game value mirrors regularly. And that's just like not a thing. This is a tech card for a circumstance that doesn't exist, but because it's a tech card, it's not bad, it's just not relevant to current situations. And you can, like I just mentioned with the Jailer Mal'Ganis combo lock, actually find a very clear home for Photographer Fizzle, and I do think it gets to live in that home. The next one hurts me a lot. I want to rank Climatic Necrotic Explosion much higher, and it's really just because I want to rank Rainbow Death Knight cards highly, but this is a 10 mana spell. You're gonna have to spend a lot of corpses, and spending corpses isn't actually nearly as easy as generating them. And the actual effect of the card is probably not game-winning on its own. In a deck that plays this will be very meaningful when it comes down, but there'll be a lot of games that end without this having played a part, and there'll be a lot of games where you simply don't draw this because Rainbow Death Knight's not great at drawing cards. And once again, it has the constant restriction that is being a rainbow card. You can't run 2 anything or 3 anything. There are a lot of really pushed reasons to run this decks. There are just too many things inherently bad about being a 10 mana rainbow card that it's not strong enough to fix them. If this was improved by corpses you had generated, I think the card would be tremendously better, and it would actually be a reason to run the archetype. But since you have to find a way to spend them, it's not like a 1-card win condition anymore. Now you have to run other cards to spend them, and most of those cards in the current game state just aren't that good. Another card that I would like to rank higher, but is really just a tech card, is Ren, Orchestrator of Doom. This is just anti-combo. If you're running into a bunch of Mal'Ganis Warlocks that are trying to lock you out of the game with a Jailer, if you're running into a bunch of Miracle Druids, not Miracle Druids, Miracle Rogues, if there's some other combo deck, you run Ren, Orchestrator of Doom, or possibly more likely, you just have an ETC in your deck and you always have Ren inside of the ETC. Because Ren is a really disruptive card to combo decks, but if you're a combo deck yourself, like, you can't be playing this in the Mal'Ganis Jailer deck because you can disrupt your own combo. It won't be good for you. So really, this is for a Warlock deck that I don't know exists. Like, I'm not sure which Warlock deck is playing that doesn't have combos. Like, there are mana cheat combos for demons, for undead, for different combos for locking the game state entirely and just guaranteeing a win. I don't know what Warlock deck doesn't get messed up by playing their own Ren. So as a result, I think Ren's really just a tech card in case there are very bad matchups for Warlock that happen to be combo matchups where you're willing to disrupt your own deck, because all the Warlock decks seem like they care about getting disrupted at the minute to me. And topping off our C tier, we have Going Down Swinging. The card's fine. Like, this isn't a tech card, it's just fine. In conjunction with stuff like the new Eye of Shadow, it can be a pseudo Reno effect, where against a full board, you swing at everything, you have lifesteal on all of it. It's going to heal you for quite a lot. If you have a weapon equipped or an instrument smasher for synergy, there's like cool stuff happening there. But on its own, just like what the card does without synergy effects, it's not that great. With synergy effects, you're devoting the card slots to it. It's a lot better. But realistically, this card is just, it's okay. It serves a purpose that might be needed in helping Demon Hunter to stabilize. And that's good. But historically, the best Demon Hunter decks aren't the ones that are stabilizing, they're the ones that are killing your opponent outright. And that's why I'm very hesitant about it. It really should be like a B card on the low end of B, so I'll go ahead and move it up to there rather than leaving it in C. But I'm not hot on it, it's the closest to being in C tier of all my B tier cards. Now, talking about B tier cards, let's talk about Stranglethorn Heart, a card that would be much lower on the list if it didn't have tradable. This is the reason you play the deck. So you would consider putting this in A tier if it were actually good, but it's a 10 mana card that doesn't kill your opponent. Frankly, even putting it in B tier is optimistic because it's imagining that Control Hunter is going to work, and Control Hunter wasn't working previously and has lost many of the tools that it used to stabilize, and as I talk, I'm moving this down to C tier because the deck it wants to be in doesn't exist. I don't believe in Stranglethorn Heart because I don't believe in Control Hunter. They're losing the Grizzly Bears, they're losing Stormpike Rams, they're losing the Hunter Hero, which is a tool that helps them stabilize by clearing board, by healing, and gives them an insane value hero power. They're losing so much in Control Hunter, they're getting stuff that is a payoff, but it doesn't let you live to do it. And that's the problem. If Control Hunter seemed viable, I would rank this higher, but as it stands, it's a payoff card in an archetype that can't survive long enough to cash in that payoff. Oh, I realized what I've done wrong. I grabbed the wrong Demon Hunter card and tried to convince myself I was running the right one in C tier. The B tier Demon Hunter card is Going Down Swinging. C tier, however, is Helveria Darkraven. She's a 4-mana 4/3 rush, which is just not good. After a friendly rush minion attacks, you give your minions +1 attack. That's a really strong effect. It's essentially a pseudo Bloodlust when you combine it with like Coordinated Strike, Feldori Warband, or what's the other one? Security? Feldori Warband probably won't work if this is in your deck though, so it's the other two mostly. You can use this because just having it in your deck makes your opponent fear what it represents, so they have to play differently because they're afraid of this Bloodlust style effect, where if they have a minion, you play this, you play Security, you buff all your minions by +4 when all of that attacks, and that's very scary for your opponent. But realistically, this is like the 30th card, if it's the 30th card, in those rush decks, and I don't quite think it's good enough to see play. It's just a 4-mana 4/3 rush is very weak. Bloodlust effects that require like 7-mana combos is very slow. This card is just very optimistic. I don't see it getting played very much at all. Speaking of optimistic, I feel slightly better about this, but it feels optimistic still. It's the Paladin legendary spell Starlight Groove. Starlight Groove gives your hero Divine Shield, and for the rest of the game, playing a holy spell refreshes it. That's really cool. I can't pretend it's not incredibly cool. And there are some synergy effects for this that I'm a big fan of. But honestly, I just don't, like, how much value does this give you? Like, it makes Spotlight a better card. And that's about it in terms of synergies. It gives you some amount of health. It's going to vary depending on matchup and what kind of minions you're looking at. Against a mage or a Death Knight or anyone else that can deal 1 damage with hero power, it's going to give you a lot less health, for instance. Against some classes, it might give you huge amounts of health because they can't deal 1 damage without hero power and their minions are big. But realistically, how often do you need this? Is Spotlight good enough to run without this? And if so, did you need this to run Spotlight to improve it? This feels like a lot of the time it's going to get played, and it's going to look like it did a lot, and it's realistically going to have a very minor impact on the matchup. If it turns out Paladin is a viable deck and they're only barely living through their matchups with Starlight Groove, it will be the most important card in the deck, because it will be the reason that matchup is winnable. But in most matchups, I feel like this is just not going to matter very much at all. Next up, I'm throwing the One-Amalgam Band into B tier. It's a 7-mana 6/6 battle cry, gain a bunch of random effects based on every minion type you've played. And like realistically, if an Amalgam deck is functioning, if there's a good Menagerie deck out there, this card will be in the deck. But it's just like, fine. You're not making a Menagerie deck because this exists. You're just throwing in a Menagerie deck like, oh, hey, I've got room for a 7-mana card that does a lot. I'll take a Rush, Lifesteal, Divine Shield 6/6 for 7. That sounds pretty good. The One-Amalgam Band is going to be completely fine into any deck that already runs Menagerie, but it's not a compelling reason to run a Menagerie. In that same merit, if you're playing an Overload deck, you're probably going to take a good look at Enza, and since he does affect all Overload cards, not just the ones in your hand or the ones in your deck or while he's on the board, he's a permanent effect, odds are Enza's going to be worth playing. If we're talking about a card being a bad top deck on turn 15, he's still a 5-mana 5/5. There's a lot worse you could do. On curve, he's a really, really impactful minion that changes the way the game plays out. I think if you're playing any sort of Overload package, there's not really a good reason not to run Enza. There might be good reasons to run other cards that ends up pushing Enza out of the deck, but I think it's unlikely. I think Enza will neatly fit into pretty much any Overload Shaman package. There's not really a good reason not to run him. But at the same time, I don't think Enza's the reason you run Overload. Remember, that's how I've defined my A tier. Once you get up to A tier, it's because you're the reason I'm playing the deck. And Enza is not the reason to play an Overload Shaman. If he's the payoff, you shouldn't play Overload Shaman, we need more. And we got more, so it'll be interesting to see how that deck shapes out. Next up, I have Rhythm and Roots. I'm of the belief that while some cards say spend 5 mana, do nothing, and they're too slow, Rhythm and Roots is right on the threshold. Druid has more mana to waste than most classes. Hero Power Druid has some early minions and the ability to gain a lot of health with its hero power. I think realistically, Druid can afford to play a 4-mana do nothing. And I think almost every time, both you and your opponent will be playing this as summon 3/5/5 Ancients in 2 turns. I think the other one gives you marginal stat gain that doesn't matter for waiting 2 turns longer. I don't see a good reason not to do that. However, 3/5/5 Ancients for waiting 2 turns and 4 mana is an incredibly good value. And there is a Druid deck that I showed off in my Druid video for the rotation that's able to just spam the board with wave after wave of huge minions. Each card is just an entire board spam, and they've got hero power behind it, chipping away and pushing them into the win. And I think Rhythm and Roots easily fits into that deck. And as long as there is a viable ramp Druid deck that cares about flooding the board in any capacity, Rhythm and Roots will be able to see play in that deck. And lastly, we have a card where I can't put it lower than B, but I don't see what everyone else sees when they look at Symphony of Sins. I'm not going to get out all of the movements right now. Symphony of Sins has 7 movements. You get one when you play it, and you shuffle the other 6 in. They're all 3-mana spells, and they're all really good spells. But here's the thing. None of them synergize with how Warlock wins the game already. I lied. I got out the Symphony of Sins. I want to explain really effectively why I don't value this. Let's talk about the Warlock win conditions and how these relate to them. Mill the top 6 cards of your opponent's deck. Cool. If we cared about disruption, we'd probably have run Rin. We'd probably have run Dirty Rats. This is not a reliable way to disrupt your opponent, and if we did need to disrupt our opponent, we already have cards for that. Movement of Pride draws your highest cost minion, reduce its cost by 6. I mean, not shuffling 6 cards into your deck as a Warlock is also a pretty reliable way to hit any card in your deck. I don't see the need for this. It does let you do really cool Thaddeus combos. That's the thing that I think Symphony of Sins is actually threatening to do, is you can do crazy Thaddeus combos now with Movement of Pride, where you have a 4-cost Thaddeus because he's your only 10-drop, only you have no reliable way of shuffling Thaddeus into your deck before you draw this, and it ends up in a really awkward thing where there are just draws where the combo doesn't work, and I don't think you can build around it at that point. Movement of Wrath is big Hellfire, that's nice, but I'm not needing that. Deal 6 damage, lifesteal. Again, the damage is nice, the lifesteal and heal is nice, not a win condition. Buff a lot of stuff by +6/+6, that's incredibly nice. That's a fantastic card. Not how I'm winning the game, though. Movement agreed, I don't even have 6 empty card slots in my hand. What are you talking about? I'm a Warlock, I'm just gonna mill my own cards. Movement of Sloth, summon a big dude, give him Taunt and Reborn, definitely nice. Really good 3-cost card, and that's what he looks like. All of these are good, and if any of them matter at all, which they usually will, you'll usually be able to find spots where they matter except for maybe Movement of Envy, then that's really, really good value, but Warlock decks aren't value decks. They have ways to close out the game, and this doesn't synergize with this. I don't want to put a 6-mana spell into my deck that's not helping me win the game, and this isn't. It's good value. I can imagine it fitting into decks if I'm underestimating just how strong these cards are, but it feels like a card that steamrolls an arena and not a card that wins a constructed match. Moving on to A tier, let's get started with the card that I think a lot of people are very worried about, but I'm not too worried myself. It's Cagehead. Cagehead is an 8-mana 5/1 undead, none of that matters, that's terrible, but what matters is Death Rattle summon a 9/9 Blightboard with Charge and Taunt, and you have ways to instantly kill this like Construct Quarter. You also have ways like Death Grell of duplicating the Death Rattle, or Mosh Pit of getting it reborn. Generally speaking, this is the sort of card where if it comes down, you're probably trying to kill it immediately. You don't want to leave this vulnerable to Silence or any other removable effect that might negate its Death Rattle, because if this is in your deck and it comes down, it's your win condition. Even if this is just the capstone of your curve in an Unholy deck, if you just make a tempo aggro Unholy deck and you throw in an 8-drop at the top, you still need to kill this immediately. This is your win condition, because once it gets played, the game has gone on long enough that you're losing unless this kills them. So anytime this comes down, it needs to die immediately. It's basically living in conjunction with Construct Quarter. Those cards are very closely tied. A lot of people are really worried about this just like generating tons of boards and killing your opponent, but they tend to be talking about like really hypothetical situations. They're like, if you're on a contested board where you have 2 minions and your opponent has minions they can trade into, you can play Cagehead for 8 and do Death Growl twice for 10 mana, 3-card combo on a contested board, trade them in, get 4 Blight boards, and kill your opponent from 36. And all of that's true, but like, check out this combo. If my opponent's got 9 health left, I can play him and kill him with Construct Quarter because the pig has 9 attack. Like, I can just make up situations where other things kill my opponent too. I don't need to get that complicated with it. If you're describing a super elaborate situation, you can make any card win the game, and it doesn't need to be that complicated. You need to be describing combos that happen from hand or from reliably generated situations. Like, if 1 minion needs to stick to the board, that's okay. That can happen sort of regularly. But if you need 2 minions, and your opponent has to be contesting that with minions of their own, we're getting too deep into the hypothetical. It's not going to reliably happen. For me, I think Cagehead just fits in at the top of an Unholy Death Knight curve, and I'm not convinced that the best Unholy decks will have a curve that goes that high. I think, honestly, he might be lower than this. And he's not really the reason you're building around him unless you make combo decks. And that's the reason I'm putting him here, is because I do think people will make combo decks around him, and I do think he will see play as a B tier card just thrown into decks where he fits in pretty regularly. But I think people are going to make a lot of decks that try to make Cagehead work, and I've shown off one on my channel that's absolutely terrible, and I think in the current expansion, most will absolutely be terrible. Cagehead, honestly, I'm being too nice to him. He should be down in B tier. He shouldn't be that high up. I'm rating Cagehead like the combo decks that use him exist right now, and I don't think they do. All of the combos for Cagehead are either too much work or require way too much time. Unholy doesn't have the draw or the stabilization ability to run the control combo deck that gets Cagehead to work. The deck just isn't functional as a combo deck yet. And as a result, I think he does only get to be in B tier. I was being way too nice to him. ETC is going in my A tier, and I will never put him lower than that, no matter what the win rate says for the card, because I love the existence of ETC. A 4-mana 4/4 is just fine. It lets you sideboard and counterattack things. I think, generally speaking, ETC has the potential to be one of the highest skill expression cards in the game. I know that a lot of the time it's just gonna be like, oh yeah, you have ETC. You have a bad matchup here that you win with X card, a bad matchup there you win with Y card, and you throw in Silence because it's generally useful. I think a lot of the time there's just a generically good ETC that doesn't really allow you to do interesting things with it. But the ability for ETC to allow you to put really interesting cards into your deck. For instance, Immolate can go into a Control Warlock deck, and there are going to be matchups where that's relevant, and it's super interesting to think about things like that. And I think the existence of ETC is very good for the game. I think you're not building around him, but he can go in virtually any deck, and I think that's the same level of power. Sure, you don't put him in aggro decks, but I mean, aggro decks follow different deck building rules than the rest of us. And I realize now that I was being too nice to Zoc Falloxnout. He should be down here in B tier as well, because he's not the reason you're running Hero Power Druid. You don't particularly care about this guy. If you're running Hero Power Druid and you care about Zoc, then you're going to be spamming the board over and over again. Otherwise, they just kill you with hard removal on Zoc, because you've never threatened them in that way before. You need to be putting board flood after board flood for Zoc to be good, in which case he's just fitting in with the crowd. He's not the reason you're doing it. And I think the reason you play Hero Power Druid is because you want a Hero Power that deals 5 and gains 5. You don't care about Zoc. He's not the reason you're doing it. He's definitely high in B tier. If these were ordered by power, he'd be pretty far to the left. But I don't think he's an A tier card. I think I was being too nice when I put him there initially. And damn it, another one snuck by me. MC Blingtron, why are you still in the list? You definitely deserve to be down here in B tier, because you're not playing any deck because of MC Blingtron. Anyways, MC Blingtron is not just a good card for what it does for you. MC Blingtron is a 3-4 mech and a 1-2 weapon. That's a spider tank and a hero power for 5 mana. You were never happy to hero power, and you certainly weren't running spider tank recently. So all we care about is your opponent's weapon that makes them take 1 more. Can we get enough value out of that to feel good running Blingtron? Absolutely. I have no doubt that Blingtron can be regularly cashed in as essentially a fireball to the face in a mini rogue decks. And I think there will be rogue decks that have room for him and that care about this effect and that play him, but he will never be the reason to play those decks. He's not at that power level. Whereas Jive Insect is absolutely an A-tier card. This is a reason to seriously start thinking about running mid-range overload decks. 5 mana Ragnaros is kind of a good thing. Like, this is essentially the entire reason you played Ramp Druid in Classic WoW, or Classic Hearthstone rather, is 5 mana, not 5 mana, but turn 5 Ragnaros is like essentially what that deck was built to do. I know it got a bunch of other things earlier too, but this is an entire Classic deck in one card, basically. It's very strong, very high tempo. The deck that runs this will not view Overload 2 as a severe problem, and in fact will likely view it as a positive many times. Jive Insect is a class, or at least archetype-defining card for Overload Shaman, and God knows Shaman needs some cards like that. I just wish Warrior had also gotten some too. Next up, we have Mr. Mukla. I think Mr. Mukla is just kind of nuts. I mean, he's a 6 mana 10/10 with Rush. That's not a do-nothing minion. That just immediately kills literally any minion your opponent has played. There's nothing that's living through that. And it fills your opponent's hand with bananas, which are not good cards. You prevent their next draw, you give them a bunch of bananas, which, like, yeah, they can use them against you. Their cards in their deck are usually better than bananas, though. The deck that runs this probably has board control, especially after playing Mr. Mukla. Mr. Mukla seems very strong. While Stranglethorn Heart is not a compelling reason to play that deck, Mr. Mukla absolutely is a reason to care about having Big Beast. The difference is that while you might build a deck with the intention of resummoning Mr. Mukla, you won't build a deck with the intention of playing Stranglethorn Heart. In fact, you might just throw Mr. Mukla into literally every Hunter deck you play this expansion. That's what I'll be doing. I can't see a single good reason not to play him in every single Hunter deck. He just seems incredible. His downside is partially an upside. He has almost no downside if the game is going according to plan. If the game's not going according to plan, boy, howdy do you like this effect. He's just a wonderful card. And I think Heartbreaker Adonis is getting underrated. Before I made any videos talk about the expansion, I waited for all the cards to come out and I started evaluating how I would make some of my decks for those classes. And I think that really helps me think higher of Heartbreaker Adonis than a lot of people have, because they give their gut reaction to the card when they first see it. It's a 4 mana 4/4, and once you heal it for 5, it'll deal 5 damage to a random enemy. Healing for 5 is a lot, that's not very helpful to you. It turns out there are multiple ways to heal for 5 pretty immediately within Priest. If you have Idol's Adoration and a Fan Club out, you can use Fan Club and Idol's Adoration, heal your whole board for 3, you probably have other overheal minions that care about that, and heal Heartbreaker Adonis for 2, getting him over the 5 he needs and triggering his overheal to deal 5 on turn 4. With 0 additional mana spent. This was just earlier setup, that was 2 mana of setup that already wanted to be in the deck. You can trigger Heartbreaker Adonis like that. You can play him on 5 and flash heal him immediately to get a 5 mana 4/8 Battlecry, deal 5 damage to a random enemy. That's absolutely sick. And then it continues to threaten tremendous value with that overheal. Heartbreaker Adonis has 2 different, very easy ways to trigger his ability. He's not really a finisher. Like, he can be, but I think in most scenarios, it's not that he's killing your opponent because you keep healing him. It's that he's the straw that breaks the camel's back, where they completely lose board control to you and the damage starts to spiral out of control. The 4/8 that kills their biggest minion is going to be too much for them to recover from, and I think that Heartbreaker Adonis is going to be the top end of some really scary tempo overheal decks. And additionally, if you're just playing a normal overheal deck, he's fine. He's not incredible, but he's fine. With these last 3 cards, with Bounce Around, Love Everlasting, and Posic Audio Engineer, I have a hard time determining where they should go because it determines so much based on the meta. Posic is the only one I feel comfortable putting in S tier. I wholly agree with the sentiment that this card is just nuts. It's a 4 mana 5/4, and Battlecry add 2 3/3 bots to your opponent's hand. They cost 3 mana, by the way. They do nothing, they're just mechs. And Death Rattle, summon them for yourself. So you play this and your opponent deals with it. Alright, cool, it has Death Rattle summon 2 3/3s. That's insane. If it doesn't have that Death Rattle, if it does something else, then your opponent spent their turn playing 3 mana 3/3 vanilla minions. That's terrible. That's wonderful. He just disrupted the shit out of them, because presumably you're running this as like the highest cost minion in a really, really aggressive deck. And if that's the case, they don't have time to be playing out these bots to make sure that you don't get them. Pazik is a disgustingly strong tempo card, and he gets played in the most degenerate types of decks where you're just like all in off the mulligan, right? You draw your opening hand and it's immediately Jesus take the wheel, because you're going to be out of steam on turn 5 and one of you is going to be dead. And Pazik fits so nicely into the top end of that curve. He's incredibly good at what he does. I can't imagine that he does not see play. Love Everlasting is one I'm super conflicted about, and I'm going to bring it down to the A tier. I'm not putting in an S. And here's the reason. I tried to make a Control Priest list that I felt good about, and I couldn't do it. I could not make a Control Priest deck where I was like, this has a clear and good win condition against other decks. I just could not find that statement when I was looking at Control Priest. If you just want to outlast aggro decks, it's definitely worse than a Blood Death Knight. And if you want to beat combo decks, it doesn't have as good of a disruption system as other classes do. If you want to beat control decks, it doesn't have the win condition for that. It's just hoping to outvalue you, have run out of resources even slower. I don't think Spalna Control Priest is going to be a top tier deck. I think this is the reason to run that deck, but I don't think it's broken. Now that said, I am talking about current expansion. I can see Love Everlasting becoming one of the most disgusting cards in the game in coming expansions. I can imagine that 6 months from now, 2 expansions from now, I'm going to view turn 3 Love Everlasting the same way I currently view turn 5 Guff. Realistically, it will probably be more like turn 6 or turn 7 right after your Spalna that you play Love Everlasting, but it's potato potato. I think Love Everlasting has the potential to grow into one of those menacing cards in the game, but it currently is not there. The deck that it goes into isn't strong enough for me to put this in S tier. And with Bounce Around, I just feel bad putting an S. I almost want to put it in A. Here's the reason I feel bad putting Bounce Around in S. There's going to be a top tier Miracle Rogue that's not really up for debate. They are losing good cards. They're losing Edwin and they're losing Mailbox Dancer, and those are very good cards. But they're getting so many new tools that they're realistically going to be 2 or 3 completely distinct Miracle Rogue decks. These are all going to get tested individually, and maybe they will get refined into multiple different lists or refined into a single cohesive Miracle Rogue list that is the one that everyone runs. I don't know. But as a result, there are so many different tools at Miracle Rogue's disposal that I can't really be sure what their best deck is going to look like and if it'll have room or need for Bounce Around. You can make a Renathal Miracle Rogue that easily gets to 40 cards and doesn't feel like it has obvious cuts. Like, that's how many good tools Rogue currently has. For me, the reason Bounce Around goes into my S tier is pretty much just this gives you more win conditions, right? You play this, it lets you replay Elven Minstrels to draw more cards. It lets you replay Astalor to get more Astalor to win that way. It lets you get bigger minions off of your Stenstone Graveyard or bigger weapons off of your Draka. This fits in so concisely with every single thing this character wants to do to win. I guess the reason it feels wrong for me to put in my S tier is I said this is a compelling reason to play the deck. And with Miracle Rogue, there are so many other compelling reasons to play that deck. It's not Bounce Around. You didn't need Bounce Around. It was S tier before, it'll be S tier after it. Oh, it's so close to just being really good. I don't think Bounce Around is broken. Not any more broken than the rest of what Miracle Rogue does. And I've briefly gone through and done exactly what I said I wasn't doing. I've reordered this by my perceived power level of the cards. I do think that Black Rock and Roll is just the worst card in the set. I think it's even worse than Rockmaster Voon. It's a close call. Black Rock and Roll is do nothing on turn 5, but at least it can win you the game later. On the other hand, Rockmaster Voon might do something and Black Rock and Roll literally doesn't. Like, maybe you just need to copy the minions. It's debating which way of doing nothing and losing is worse. I can't really meaningfully say one is worse than the other. But coming into C tier, I do think that the deck that wants Infinitize the Maxitude is just not even remotely close to there. At least DJ Manastorm can be played alongside other stuff. There's really nothing supporting Maxitude at all. Tony King of Piracy is just a really weird tech card that I don't see the need to run with Jailer combos and could honestly go... Honestly, he could go down here. I'm just being cautious about him being in Jailer combos when I keep him in C tier. I think his potential use alongside the Jailer is still more of merit than Infinitize the Maxitude in anything. Stranglethorn Heart is just... that deck needs a lot of support, and it didn't get it. Mr. Mookla's insane, but you just run Mr. Mookla in other decks. You don't have to run the Stranglethorn Heart Big Beast deck. Alvaria Darkraven is not good enough as a minion. She needs more outside of her effect, and she doesn't have it. The deck you put this in and the mana cost it has holds it down too much. Rin sabotages most of the Warlock deck she's in, and that makes her a tech card. Bataga Refizzle is just a tech card for those Warlock decks, because it turns out they are in fact combo decks. These cards are basically the same in my mind. And even though I do think Kangor Dancing King is just a card that can be hard counter-teched by Silence and isn't very good as a consequence of that, he's definitely the best card in C tier, because unlike every other C tier card, there are times he would be high B or even low A, depending on what the meta is. One-Man Amalgam's just really not that strong. Like, if you have the ability to get his effect to go off, you may as well throw him in, but he's not the reason to run the deck, and he's not a great payoff for it either. You really just need him to be a good card in an already good deck, because he's not going to get it there on his own. MC Blingtron is face damage in Rogue, and that's always very, very valuable, but the fact that I'm paying 5 mana for a Spider Tank and a Hero Power is not appealing in and of itself. I still think the amount of damage this can threaten on the whole is much higher than anything Amalgam or the cards beneath it give you. Starlight Groove, I think, will be meaningfully important and the thing that determines whether or not you lose in some aggro matchups. I don't like the card. I think its combination with Spotlight is not that important, but I do still think it's actually pretty good. Going Down Swinging is a really meaningful stabilization card for Demon Hunters, which currently don't have a great early curve, and I think they need it. This is basically being ranked the same way as Starlight Groove, just really relevant in aggro matchups. And I think the new Druid that spams out cards nonstop really easily fits in Riddleman Roots. I think this card is going to fit so neatly into that archetype that it'll be fine. It's not incredible, but it's doing exactly what the deck wants to do, so you may as well throw it in. Same with Zoc Fox now. Like, the Hero Power archetype just also combines really well with the archetype that spams out minions, and both of these decks go in the same thing, or both of these cards go in the same deck, rather. And Zoc is obviously the better of the two. He summons more stuff and he does it immediately, whereas Rhythm and Roots is 4 mana do nothing. Enza I put in the middle of them because I do think he's better than 4 mana do nothing, but I don't think he's particularly great. On 5, he's such a strong high roll that it really, really helps his archetype. It's why I think he's this high up. Cagehead is here because, like, you just throw him down as the final thing you have when you're running out of steam in an Unholy Death Knight deck. He can be up there with Lord Marogar. Your curve already does go that high. He's not incredible, but he's definitely good. You're not playing your deck for him, and the people who try to make decks around him will encounter the frustrations I have, and I don't think Cagehead combo is going to be remotely competent, at least in this expansion. Symphony of Sin's just an insane value card. If it's synergized with any Warlock win condition, I'd be putting this very high in my A tier, but as it stands, it's actively slowing me down and preventing my win condition by shuffling 6 cards into my deck that don't help me win the game. I think a lot of people look at this and they only see how strong the movements are, and they don't see that it's preventing you from getting the reason you're playing your deck, because it's shuffling cards in on top of your win conditions. ETC doesn't deserve to be this high. ETC is A tier in my heart. Realistically, he should be low in the B tier. According to Vicious Syndicate, I'm pretty sure he's resulted in negative win rates, that in every single deck they've seen him played in, he just makes the deck lose more, which is very sad. However, I love ETC. The existence of a sideboard and the skill expression that allows is something I'm a huge fan of, and I'm gonna go ahead and make the completely copium argument that only the best players in the game will see an increase in their win rate due to running ETC. And I'm not one of them, but I'll still keep running it. You can't convince me. I love this card. Heartbreaker Adonis would be lower if there weren't multiple good ways to trigger him on curve, but as stands, you can have a good setup that allows you to play him immediately on 4, or a weaker setup that allows you to play him as a really strong 5-drop. He definitely is good enough to be a very compelling reason to play the Tempo Overheal package, and by the way, so is basically every other card in that package. Like, if I were just ranking all the cards in the expansion, you would see a lot of the Overheal stuff showing up in A tier. I'm very scared of the Jesus Take the Wheel full tempo Overheal aggro priest, and maybe I'm crazy and it's not going to be good, in which case Heartbreaker Adonis should be low in B tier. But I'm scared of that, just like I'm scared of Hero Power Druid. But unlike Adonis, these are just going along with the plan as opposed to capstones of that plan. Because the real capstone in Hero Power Druid is your Hero Power hitting for 7/7. Love Everlasting is an absolutely incredible card, and I think 2 years from now, it will probably be the highest ranking card in this expansion. If I were to go back and rank all the legendaries right before they rotated, this will either have been nerfed or it will be in my S tier right before it rotates. But it's not good enough on its own right now. Jive Insect is absolutely insane. It's the reason to play Overload Shaman. Mr. Mukla seems like the only reason to play Hunter. That class is in dire straits, it seems to me, but it's a very strong card. Bounce Around is just one of many Shadow Steps, and I think that lowers my opinion of it. And Posic Audio Engineer is just the strongest tempo card in the game currently, and I'm very scared of it. Anyway, that'll be the legendary tier list. I hope you enjoyed listening to this. If you did, then like, comment, subscribe. All that stuff really does help the channel grow, and I'll see you in the next one, when the expansion actually gets here.